Lou, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you and hear you.
Nice to see you as well. Can you
Mm.
give myself and the audience a little background about who you are and what you do?
Yep, so I am Lou Baxter. I have been in trading standards law enforcement for 20 years. I started what is the National Trading Standards Scams team in 2012 because I used to come across scam victims. But this was the time that I did a proper job, not management. I used to come across scam victims all the time. And actually, what used to happen was we'd get to them too late in their journeys. Their information, they would have been scammed once, their information would have then been trafficked onto other organized crime groups. And by then, they were too trapped in that cycle of victimization. So it was harder for us to get proper interventions or support to them or to get them to hear what we were saying. So I started what was essentially the scams team at that point to try and do something more proactive about it and try and get to the people before they got too victimized by these criminals.
So, was there a particular case that motivated you more than others?
There was one particular chap who was 92, and he was an ex World War II gunner, and he ended up getting caught up as part of the criminal entities. He ended up being used as a money mule,
Mm.
and it didn't matter. And we visited him like so many times and spoke to him. It didn't matter what we did; he was too stuck in that cycle. But when we looked at it, we actually found out that he'd phoned us like 6 years before, and we'd just gone, "Don't respond to that one. That's a scam." It was a letter scams that he was falling for at the time, and then he got moved into different sorts of scams. And I think if we'd gone then, it might have had a different outcome.
Hmm. So let's talk about this. You almost outlined like a cycle of vulnerability, a cycle of scams on a specific individual. So let's start at the beginning. What are the most common scams that you're seeing today?
So scams that I'm still seeing. So my team tend to deal with predominantly letter scams, so still old school clairvoyant scams, um, lottery scams, and letters telling you that you've won money or you're gonna there's inheritance coming your direction. You just got to pay an admin fee. Or the clairvoyant scams are slightly more sinister in the fact that you have to pay money for a lucky talisman or something bad will befall your family, or that they're generally all quite linked up as well. So you might get a lottery letter on a Monday saying you're going to win, you've won £10 million on the lottery, you just got to pay £45 admin fee. So it's relatively small amounts. You'll then get, but you've only got 7 days, 7 days
Mm.
to respond to it, or the money will go elsewhere. You've also got to keep it a secret because if you tell anyone else, they might want to take your money, or somebody else might have an alternative claim. So then day three, you'll get a follow-up letter saying you still haven't made your claim. There's this money's waiting for you. And then day four, you might get a clairvoyance letter saying there's money on your cards to send us money for this lucky talisman. So it's all linked in together. It's all really clever marketing, which just plays into that too good to be true messaging that the criminals are trying to get across.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're attacking on multiple fronts at the same time.
And then they'll phone you. Because what we often find with scam victims is it starts with sort of some sort of data mining scam where you'll be asked to provide lots of your personal information. So they'll have your phone number, they'll have your identity numbers, they'll have your address, they'll have all of those things. So they can target you. It's like a pincer movement targeting you from all different sides.
Yeah. So rather than the "Dear Sir, insert name,
Mm.
you have won the lottery," it's
Yep.
specifically addressed to the individual with
Yes.
enough private information to be convincing.
Yes, so we find that and they use your name repeatedly throughout the letter. So, oh, Louise, we know that how much you need this money, Louise. We know that because I've got two children, Louise. We know you've got children and family that need support, Louise. We know that you've got a mother that might need additional care or something like that. I haven't. If I said that about if my mum listens to this, mum, I know you don't need additional care. Just to be clear, I'll get told off for that. But it's that sort of information that they hone it down. So what we find is that if you respond to one letter scam, what happens is your details get sold on to other organized crime groups. And then what happens is you get bounced, you get trafficked from one group to the next group. And then the lists, so the criminals call them suckers lists,
Hmm.
hone those lists down and down and down and down. So sometimes they're getting a hit rate of between 80 and 90%.
Oh.
they got markers by people's names. So if, for example, one particular, we find that some of the high roller scams, like big investment scams, might be men might be more likely to play into those because of their propensity to gamble bigger than some women. It's just genetics in relation to that. And I'm generalizing. I'm not being sexist in that space. I'm generalizing there. So what you could find is that if somebody, so Chris is a high roller. Chris really interested in wine. Marker by your name. Hit him hard. High roller gets paid on this month. All of this information. These are the things that he's into, and then you will get sold on to other people going, tap him up for this, try him for these things. So they have a lot of information about us to be able to then target us in really clever ways.
That's particularly scary that they're merging merging scam methodologies and information on us.
It's also like romance scams. We've known that criminals before have combed the obituaries in newspapers. I don't know whether they still run those anymore, but whether they comb them and actually target you, because again, it's everybody can be vulnerable to being scammed at any point. So historically, it would be like, oh, it's only old people that fall for those, or people don't fall for those sort of things. But it's about situational vulnerability. So something that's going on around you can cause you to be pushed easier into a hot state by a criminal, or to make an unwise decision you wouldn't usually make because of the situation going on around you. Bereavement is one of those situations. And then once you've got obviously the loneliness, the bereavement, the grief, the family pressure, all of those other things that go on around you in that situation, the criminals will target you at that time.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about situational vulnerability, kind of events in our lives, events that are happening around us. What other events kind of result in that situational vulnerability? Obviously, death of a spouse, parent, or child.
Divorce, relationship breakdown, birth of a child, periods of mental health. So the average person within the UK has 4 periods of mental health during the course of a year. They catch you in one of your periods of mental health. And potentially you could not get the best outcome for you. So if you think about situational vulnerability from anything, so we're in you obviously you might be seeing on the news that our economy isn't the greatest at the moment. However, also when they're talking about net zero and actually how we're all pushing to save energy, but also make our bring our emissions down as well, you're expecting people to, in a situation where there's a cost of living crisis because of the energy problems, also then move into a marketplace, which is green up your house. So solar panels, heat pumps, all of those things. So you've got situational vulnerability and marketplace vulnerability because they've never done this before. So you've got double whammy vulnerability, which means that the criminals will exploit that. The cost of living crisis, because they know people will be stressed and panicked and trying to look for a way out and wanting things to change. And there's also a lot of government grants going on as well, which allows a criminal to be able to target you. And then you've got marketplace, which is, but if we've got a solution for you, which will solve this. So we can put solar panels on your house, we can put foam in your loft, which we're finding is completely illegal. And so they're using this to target these people here, which it's just a storm of vulnerability at the moment from our perspective.
And then they throw in the urgency of, well, we've got the solution, but it's only available for 10 homes in your neighborhood or 10 days, and you need to act now.
Yeah, the price will only be there for this amount of time, or if you don't do it, we're moving out of the area. Like if it was door knocking, with the letter scams, a lot of it is you've got 7 days to respond, or we'll give your price to somebody else. And it's that they target you at that situational vulnerability, and then what they do is they repeat target you constantly. So then you don't really have time to stop and think. And sometimes we find with scam victims, because of the situations around them, like so there could be cognitive decline or early onset dementia or loneliness and social isolation. Once they keep getting repeat targeted, to then actually get through that barrier. So the criminal becomes their friend, like in romance scams as well, comb the obituaries, make friends with somebody, essentially develop a relationship with them. You've got to get this person to admit that their friend is stealing money from them. So it's like interfamiliar financial abuse as well. Like how do your carer taking your purse? How do you get that person to admit that they've been scammed? and then all the consequences of that. I've worked with scam victims where the penny has dropped, and the mental health effects it has on those people is catastrophic, because if they really admit how much they've lost and what this means, and then admit that to people, it causes a huge amount of mental health issues for people and anxiety.
I mean, it's definitely one of the things I've seen with scams is that the scammers work really hard to isolate people
Hmm.
and to
Very much so.
exploit the loneliness, exploit the rifts in the families, and well, don't tell your kids about this because they don't understand the relationship that we have, and
Mhm.
they don't want you to be happy. They just want your money.
It's we're doing some research at the moment around the similarities between criminals and their scam victims and coerce and control in domestic violence situation,
Hmm.
because it's that emotional abuse and it's coerce and control. It's constant all of the time. So if you think the average domestic violence victim takes 7 times to leave, the same with scam victims.
Hmm.
I think it's you're more likely to, if you fall for a scam, you're more likely to be a repeat victim within the next 3 months or something like that, because you get repeat targeted. And as society and law enforcement, quite a lot of the time, and not me, we blame those. Why didn't you leave? Why did you respond to that one? So
Yeah.
it's there's a lot of victim blaming and shaming that goes on in this space as well, which doesn't allow people to feel confident to report it and to go put their hand up and go, do you know what? I have been scammed. I need some help with this, because we victim blame people in this space a little bit still.
Yeah. What percentage of scams do you believe actually get reported?
About it's between 5 and 15%.
Oh gosh. So if
Tiny
there's
amount.
so if there's a billion dollars of scams going on, then it probably is 10 billion, 10 times that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a tiny, tiny amount. And again, it's about resources and what support those people get when actually they phone. What's the point in reporting if you're not going to get your money back or get support? So
Yeah.
it needs to be more collaborative. We need to work better across public, private sector, law enforcement, financial institutions to ensure that we're plugging all of the gaps to stop the criminals infiltrating, but also encouraging people the peer-to-peer support from scams is, in my opinion, and the education is one of the most valuable pieces of disruption to criminals, but most valuable for communities, because if you build that community resilience from grassroots to grey roots, you're going
Hmm.
to stop the criminals infiltrating it. It also makes it conversation as usual, which takes away the shame element of it. Like vulnerability, again, we don't talk about being vulnerable because that feels like there's a shame element to that as well.
Yeah. It's vulnerability and it just even discussing being vulnerable, not like in the sense of you're being taken advantage of, but just talking about things you're uncomfortable with or mistakes that you've made is
Mhm.
just not the normal human condition.
No, when I was getting divorced, I was particularly vulnerable. I didn't know I was vulnerable until I wasn't vulnerable, and then
Hmm.
when I reflected, I was like, "All right, wow, that was a little bit edgy." And I bought counterfeit fake goods because I
Mm.
was stressed and didn't think my kids had enough stuff for Christmas, and had a lot of guilt and around me and their dad splitting up. Um, Fortunately, my 8-year-old at the time opened them and went, "Aren't these fake? I watched those videos you told me about counterfeit goods and how to spot them. Isn't this what you do for a job?" And I went, "Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate you just schooling me there." I mean, once I'd finished being schooled by my educated 8-year-old, I had the wherewithal to understand how to get my money back. So I could get my money back. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it was a relatively small amount. But again, there was stress, it was panic, it was vulnerability. I wasn't aware, situational vulnerability, which again is dynamic, moving in and out of it. And I made an unwise decision. Now, who's to say if I hadn't been contacted by somebody at the time offering me something else, I wouldn't have responded to that in the same way.
Yeah. Earlier, you mentioned scam victims becoming money mules. What's the connection between those two? Because I usually think of money mules as being part of the criminal organization and they're just moving money around on behalf of the criminals for a cut. How do the victims of other scams get pulled into becoming mules?
So, what we have seen historically is like, so you've won a lottery, so I'm going to send you your £1,000 lottery win. But what you've actually got to do is you've got to passport that to to another address for me, and then actually you'll get some money in return. Once you've moved that money on, your lottery win will come in. So I'm going to send you £1,000, then your lottery win's going to come in because it's part of the process. You just have to move this money for us. And then what you would do is you would move that money to another scam victim. Scam victim would move it to another. So it's a massive tangled web until somebody finally moves it out of the country. So then what you're expecting to receive your lottery win because you've done what's been requested as part of this lottery. This is how this lottery works. You have to just move some money on for us. And the addresses will always be, so say it was Louise Baxter, it would be Louise Baxter with my address. It wouldn't be my name, it would be my address, but it would be Lottery Limited at my address. So the letter would get delivered to me and I would think it was legitimate because it's being delivered to Lottery Limited, but which just adds to the legitimacy of it. You'd also see that there might be a little bit off the top. So the criminals might allow you to keep 20 quid to be part of that entity, or send you some free trinkets, or send you some free worthless gifts. We often see with some of the lottery scams is that they might send you, your tickets came up, you've won £4.50 or $5 or whatever it is, so that then you're like, well, I'm getting something. It doesn't resonate either that you've probably spent £20,000 for a return of £4, but it's like gambling, isn't it? In a way, gambling, I find it's a hard one to compare it to because I've done some work in prevention of gambling harm before, and sometimes gambling is seen as an addiction, and addictions don't get sympathy like victims. So it's really, I don't want to say it's the same as gambling because it's not an addiction like that, but there are some of the same sort of visceral stimulations in those responses to it. So there's some map over with it.
Yeah, it's the same cognitive and neurological pathways are being exploited.
Yes.
Whether it's by a person or by a platform or by the person's own behavior.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, we're talking about a £10 billion problem a year for scams in the UK. Like it's £10 billion goes out of the UK economy. That's what we know about, based on our estimates in relation to that. But that doesn't include the additional social costs. So that taking care of people when that's happened, any additional things that may cause then medical problems or mental health problems or additional care needs. We don't calculate all of that either.
And all the isolation from friends and family that results of the shame and the victim blaming and
people
all that.
Are more likely to die. Older people are 2.5 times more likely to die or go into residential care once they've been defrauded in their own homes.
Oh.
So if you came into my house and stole my purse, I would get support.
Yeah.
If you phone me up and I give you my purse, I'm not getting the same treatment, but it's the same crime.
Yeah.
So
what kind of support is out there for people who have been victims of scams, and how has that kind of changed over the years?
So we work with lots of different partners, but specifically local trading standards partners so we proactively identify the victims using the criminals lists that they use. So as part of our investigative work, we will seize those lists so that we can then push that information down to local authorities so they can go and visit those people and say, look, we think you're a victim of, we know, or we think you're a victim of a scam. Can we come and talk to you about how we can support you better? And then there's key things like, so you can put a call blocker in just to block the calls, to cause a barrier, some friction. You can do some work with their financial institution to ensure that their accounts are protected. My favourite scheme is working under the Friends Against Scams banner, which is our proactive education campaign, where you can do 20 minutes of online learning about scams. And then there's a call to action at the end of it, which is what you can do about this now, how you can help us. But if you've been a scam victim, you can become something called a scam marshal. So essentially, you work for us. You gather quick time intelligence for us about what calls you're getting and what's landing on your doormat, so that we then have really, it's like a reporting system rather than expecting people to phone a report. But it means that we get sight of all the letters and of telephone calls, so that we've got quick time intelligence on what's landing, so that we can then try and work proactively to look at where it's coming in.
That's interesting. So when you get those lists of scam targets or the hot lists,
yeah,
do most of those people, when they're told, hey, we think you've been scammed, are they defensive about it in terms of like, oh no, that's my new friend, or are they generally pretty like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that?
it's a mix. What you often find is people will go, no, I don't respond to those sort of things. And we'll go, we know that you do. You need to like let us in. It gets you across the threshold to have those difficult conversations. But quite often you get denial. You do get quite a lot of denial. Or you get, no, I did respond, I don't anymore. Which you sometimes get some fibbing and some lies around stuff about people continually responding. But it's about that empathy and sympathy to make it all right for people to talk about it, so that you can then provide that support to make sure that they are. It's got to be inclusive. It's got to be an inclusive service, so that they feel that they're in control of their own destiny. That you're not going to take over something. So it's about what's best for each victim. We can't help everybody because some people are too entrenched, which is what I find difficult.
Yeah, there's one story that if people have been listening to the podcast, they've probably heard me tell before of a woman who was befriended by uh, guys in the U.S. supposedly guys in the U.S. military working in the Middle East, and they go on leave to the U.K. and they, lo and behold, they win the lottery while they're there. But of course, U.S. military servicemen on active duty can't participate in the lottery, so they want to send the money to her. And of course, it's all, she starts paying out the transfer fees and all this stuff. And she ends up losing her house over it. And these guys just disappear. And so she knows, in my discussion with her, she knew that, okay, I've been scammed, but she was still worried. Well, but these guys, the maybe did they get killed in battle? So she wasn't
Yeah,
able to separate the fact that they had scammed her with the fact that they weren't really in the military.
yeah.
And
Which
it
is
was it was just it was just very sad. It's like, oh,
I watched a TV program the other day about a lady who had she was recently bereaved and she'd been given a payout by her husband's work. And then she'd been approached on a social media platform where again it was an ex-military, and what they'd done is they catfished and used different photos. And he told her a story that it was he needed help for his daughter in an operation for his daughter. She sent him £80,000.
oh,
It was only when he asked her to sell her house and remortgage her house that she started to twig. She also got approached by what she thought was a celebrity asking to donate money to charity again on social media. And I think in total, she ended up losing over £400,000.
mm,
But it's that situational vulnerability. They got her right at that time when she was literally recently bereaved, situational
yep,
vulnerability, and having a windfall, not a windfall, like the inheritance. There's not many times in our life where we're going to come into a huge amount of money. And
yeah,
actually, coming into that huge amount of money can make you situationally vulnerable because you've never been in that situation before. So it's a new situation for you, which instantly makes you potentially vulnerable. And she got targeted by two different approaches, and she was on the telly, and she's very brave for sharing her story, but
yeah.
completely devastated. And she just kept going, I just feel so stupid. I was like, God, there's so many people that have fallen for different scams all of the time without probably sometimes not even realizing.
Yeah.
Especially romance scams are really tricky when you're lonely as well. When people are lonely or socially isolated, they are like the nastiest types. I think they're some of the nastiest ones when people are recently bereaved and then
Yeah.
looking for love or company.
So do you find when these teams are going out to talk to people in person
Mm-hmm.
that they think the team coming out to visit them is another scammer? Because
Yeah, yeah,
I've definitely seen the scammers switch tactics of like, hey, they've gotten some money out of the person and the person has realized that it's a scam and now they're part of the scam recovery team
yep. So
and trying
yeah,
to,
yeah.
re-victimize them as pretending to be helping them out.
We'll get your money back. We'll get your money back from the scam, which and they're part of the scam that's trying to do all those things. Yeah, we do see that. We also see that sometimes the criminals will go, law enforcement, they're trying to stop you from getting your money. So they're the baddies.
Yeah.
They're trying to steal your money. And we see quite a lot of impersonation scams as well. So we might go knock on a door and go to speak to a victim. You could get a criminal doing the same, pretending to be one of us. So
Ugh,
you get all of and what we're seeing, they can diversify so quickly. So if you think when we with COVID and the coronavirus, So when we first went into lockdown over here, within the first month of lockdown, 88,000 new websites sprung up. That was
Ugh.
a statistic I got told, right? So we don't know if those websites are legally compliant. We don't know what's on those websites. We also know that people were targeting older, socially isolated people with £45 worth of fake PPE and hand sanitizers that never arrived. And they were
Yeah.
making something like 120,000 calls a week or something
Ugh.
ridiculous, charging this and preying on people's vulnerabilities, offering things like driveway cleansing services. There's COVID on your driveway, we will cleanse your driveway. Or there's COVID in your house, you go upstairs, and then burgling the house and steal, like distraction burglary, to do
Ugh.
those things. Offering shopping services, miracle cures, antidotes. And if you're at home on your own, you don't have anyone like I'm you don't have anyone to ask. What do you think about that? What do you reckon? Do you reckon that's too good to be true? Does that sound like a good deal, even from a day-to-day conversation? And loneliness, social isolation is the equivalent on your physical health of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So you'll have the
Wow.
knock-on physical effects as well. So we've moved out of we've still obviously still got COVID here, but we've moved out of the lockdown situations into a war and into a cost of living crisis, which is just the criminals diversify far quicker than any of us do.
Yeah, that's the challenge is as soon as there is something going on in the news, some criminal enterprise has already figured out how to exploit that and take advantage of people.
Yeah, the opportunities around things like you're due impersonation scams, you're due a tax rebate, you're due a council tax rebate, because we have had a council tax rebate because of the cost of living, but it's automatically put into your bank account or however you paid it. But for people, older people that might not do it by a bank transfer, they might do it by going in somewhere and paying it. They have to physically go in there to then get their refund, which is allowing the crims to just target constantly with you're entitled to this money back. All you got to do is click this link, phone this number. And if you're again from a bit of a consequence of lockdown and COVID, we expected everybody to go from bricks to clicks in a day. You're going into lockdown tomorrow. You're not going to the shops anymore. Right. Learn to use the internet with no training on how to do that safely.
Yeah.
It's just a hotbed for criminal diversification. It really is, which is why these sort of things, the podcast and the education messages, are so key to ensuring that we can provide that resilience at a local level.
So do you think that the campaigns in terms of education are helping?
I do. So we've got I mean, I will say that because it's our
Yeah.
Friends Against Scams campaign. I will say that. But we've recruited 1 million friends. So we've done 1 million people. We launched in October 2016. So we've trained 1 million people who've done our online training, or it was face-to-face training before, on how to. It's such a complex marketplace. So there'll be. Whereas we were finding that scams messages weren't landing because there's too many messages out there. You could get one message from your bank, one message from the police, one message from a different organisation. We tried to sort of switch it around. How do we make it relevant to you when actually you've got a whole world of things going on and you're not going to be a scam victim? So why do you need to learn about it? Why would you
Yeah.
need to learn? So what we do is I would train you on how you identify someone you love that might be being targeted. So your mum, your dad, your neighbour, relative, anybody, and what are the signs that they could be being targeted by these criminal groups, and how do you essentially protect them from that happening to them, which everybody has somebody they care about. So that then lands, which then allows us to provide the training, which teaches you get vicarious learning then because you're learning about how to protect your mum.
Yeah.
And then at the end, it's trying to sort of garner this sort of social responsibility. You've got this knowledge now. What you can do about it? So share your status on social media, become a scam champion, which is sort of a step up from friends. We give you the training package for free, and you can go and train other people on from a Friends Against Scams perspective. Or if you're senior, you can become a scam ambassador. You can see what we do on Friday afternoons in the office, can't you? So it's just about sort of that call to action. Let's let's deal with this together. Let's try and support and actually take away the shame element, get people talking about the scams and all the different scams, because that peer-to-peer support Like, so if an older person goes that I've been scammed, it gives permission for some other older people to go, so have I. So have I
Yeah.
been scammed as well? Because they won't feel as silly. They don't feel as alone.
Yeah.
It's like an antenatal class when you have a baby. And I always found when I found other mums that were like, this isn't very nice, is it? And I was like, you're my mums. You know, the mums that are like, this is the most amazing experience. I was like, I'm not feeling like that. I don't feel like that. But it's that sort of permission, isn't it, to talk about certain subjects, which is what we find so invaluable with scams, is that peer-to-peer cascade of messages.
Yeah, I know that one of my guests was a victim of a romance scam, and so she started an organization where she talks about her experience, and she says afterwards, just dozens of people will come up to her and say, "I haven't told anybody, but I was a victim of a romance scam," and so she's like, "It's like you said, it gives people that permission to talk about it and
But
the
romance
permission
scams,
to get help."
but romance scams a double whammy, isn't it? Because you lose money and somebody that you loved or and thought loved you back. So you've got a relationship breakdown and the financial loss. It's
And those almost
a lot.
always break down relationships with the target's family as well.
Mm.
Because the whole key is if I can separate from the scammer's perspective, if I can separate them from the person who's going to warn them or be a sounding board and they have no sounding board, then the scammer can now become the sounding board and
Mm.
they don't have that outlet to say, gosh, if you're talking with your girlfriend, hey, gosh, that seems odd that he's telling you he loves you after 3 minutes.
It's almost like when you're a teenage girl and your dad goes, "You're not dating him." It makes you want to date him more, isn't it? It's that sort of scenario as well. And then when they
Yeah,
turn out to not be particularly nice, and you're like, "All right, Dad, you were right." You never go, "Dad, you were right," do you? You just go, you pretend it hasn't happened. But it's it's that we say it's that coerce and control. It's emotional abuse. It
yeah,
is. So it's. I think there's something around with the whole scams agenda. Scams is the wrong word. It's fraud. But
yeah,
again, from a perception point of view, people don't understand the word. Fraud is a very broad term and it's not specific, and people don't understand what it means. Um, the language we use is wrong. We trivialize it. Oh, people don't fall for that. Oh, it's old people. Oh, it's a trick. It's not a trick. It's a
yeah.
criminal offence where people are being deliberately targeted, groomed, and then their information is being trafficked from one criminal group to the next. And it's coerce and control and emotional abusive behavior. So it's yeah, it's I just we need to ramp it up to make it more serious so that we can get um more resource but more public support to ensure that we're talking about it.
It's interesting that you made the comparison with domestic violence, and it really really changes the framing of how you look at the target.
Mm,
If you think
yeah.
of it as this is more like domestic violence than someone getting something out of their wallet or something like that.
It's so the world is becoming more aware to so when you talk about domestic abuse now, it's not just about being punched or kicked or physically hurt. It's about that gaslighting and that emotional abuse part of things and that emotional control that people have. Um and that comes under sort of the legislation in regards to domestic abuse because it's just as harmful as physical abuse in those spaces.
Hmm.
And if you those are the tactics that the criminals use to ensure that they get the victims to do what they want them to do. It's never like unless it's a doorstep criminal, they're never physically in the room.
Yeah.
They're on the telephone or they're in a letter
So, do you find that most of the scammers are domestic in the UK or outside?
outside. The ones I deal with are outside the UK
And
because
does and I,
they wouldn't be in the UK if I knew about them.
and I assume that makes it much more difficult to catch them and prosecute them if you have to start working with other governments that maybe don't consider it as big of a crime as you do.
So we have some really good relationships with our counterparts in lots of different countries. So we work quite closely with the Federal Trade Commission, and so Canada and the Americans are very good. And we work and we have international liaison where we ensure that we share best practice and actually try to work. If we can all take our parts in it, it tends to work quite well. So What you'll often find is we believe so. Criminals, 99.9% is coming from abroad for us. So they will target the UK, but then there won't be victims on their own patch because those victims won't then report. They're not going to report it to UK systems, and UK residents aren't going to report it to, say, Tasmanian systems,
Yeah.
are they? They're not going to phone the Tasmanian action fraud line and go, I need to report this. So it keeps it under the radar slightly more. And then what you often find is that the prosecuting country might not have the victims or the victim impact statements or the information to be able to take that effective prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just working out, we work all much more effectively together where we can provide that support to each other to ensure that just because it's not in our domestic field, we can still do something about it. And sharing what works, what doesn't work, it's really quite effective. It's probably one of the most effective bits of work we do.
Yeah, I mean that's, in a way, this is, with internet crimes, it's such a shift in from a legal stance of, it used to be, if someone came to your doorstep and did something, okay, the local law enforcement can handle it if it's, or like a federal law enforcement can handle it. But when it starts becoming different countries, the complexity of prosecuting, it gets increased. And hopefully, as time goes by, countries will start. I mean, I think US, UK, Canada will always work well together on these sort of things. But like you said, let's use Tasmania. Might take a little bit more time to get them on board and provide the assistance in helping them to be able to prosecute when the victim wasn't in their own country.
It's also as well the complexity of the internal systems. Like I've said, if you're talking, we've got 10 different messages. That's because there's 10 different departments within one nation doing the same job, or bits of the same job, if you know what I mean. Bits of a pizza pie, aren't they? We're all doing a bit of it. So who do you work with? It's but again, is if we're all on the same page with relation to messaging and continuing to talk about it and working as best we can in the space. I mean, we've had some really effective work that we've done internationally to identify stuff, and we get a lot of our intel that way. Then just got to keep doing the best that we can in the space.
Yep. So if people want to learn more about Friends Against Scams and want to go through the training program, where can they find that training program?
They can find that on friendsagainstscams.org.uk. And there's an online link. They can watch a 10-minute video, or they can do the interactive training, which takes about 20 minutes. There's loads of resources on the website for people. And if they want the training material, all they need to do is just log into the Scam Champion section, and then all of the training materials on there for free for people to access.
And you're not just, while the program is being run out of the UK, you don't mind if people from all over the world go through the training?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. We're international Friends Against Scams. That would be brilliant. And we'll hit the 2 million, which would be amazing.
Let me go out and register that right now. I super appreciate the work that you're doing. I love that people are starting to take online scams much more seriously and looking to help and prevent, not just wag our fingers at the poor people that have been targeted. Yeah. Are there any other resources, or if people want to connect with you, how can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn if people want to connect with me on that. And again, Friends Against Scams, if you want to email me or email any of the team, they can email through the website.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's been lots of fun.